everybody, and welcome to another edition of Charts with Dan. It is the first Charts episode in the new studio with the new intro and everything else. It's still a work in progress. I know it might seem like slow going, but there's also a whole other house that I'm trying to get together. But I'm going to spend the next week trying to get things finalized and experiment with some different looks. But we're not here to talk about home renovations. We're here to talk about the box office, where, as expected, Paul Thomas Anderson's One Battle After Another was the number one film. It did break that streak that Warner Brothers had going of movies opening over $40 million. It was the best opening ever for Paul Thomas Anderson, but it was also the biggest budget that he ever had. And there's a lot to break down with that performance, as well as a bunch of other stuff, and to look at the market share and the cumulative box office for 2025 so far versus 2024. But let's dive in to this past weekend's box office. First of all, at number one is One Battle After Another. It came in at just over $22 million. Once all of the numbers were in, that's about where people saw it, more or less. I think that pipe dream of $40+ million was always that. That was never going to actually happen. If Paul Thomas Anderson had been working with his usual budget, that would be a fantastic opening. We'll see how it stacks up against his other movies. But when we're talking about a $130+ million budgeted film, financially, not the best start. It did get great critical response. The audiences that did go to see it gave it a good response. The cinema score was good, so its prospects are there for it to build on this opening, but not an incredibly impressive opening outside of the gate, again, from a box office perspective. In second place was Gabby's Dollhouse, the movie, which did very well at almost $13.7 million, a strong second place. Demon Slayer Infinity Castle came in third place, a 59% drop. It brought in another $7.1 million. It's obviously at the end of its domestic run. It was very front-loaded, but it's made $118.1 million so far. The Conjuring Last Rites comes in fourth place at $6.7 million. It's at $161 million domestic. The Strangers Chapter 2 opened to $5.8 million. That's about a 50% drop-off from the last Strangers movie, which was not a particularly successful film, so it looks like the audience is maybe not on board for these Strangers films. Unfortunately, I think it's a trilogy. They were all made at the same time, so we're getting at least one more. In sixth place was Him, which had a big drop in week number 2, 72.8%. for about $3.6 million. It's at $20.7 million domestically, but not the performance that we're used to from something that has the Monkey Paw / Jordan Peele name on it, just not connecting with audiences. The Long Walk, though, continues to hold pretty well. $3.3 million in its third week. It dropped 46.7% for a $28.7 million total. Many people have asked me where my review of that movie is. It just happened to come out in the window where I was trying to get ready to move and actually moving stuff over. I am going to see it. If there's enough demand, I could still, I guess, do a review here on the channel. It just kind of seems like old news. But I want to go see this movie. It's just, there's a lot of moving pieces right now. In eighth place was Downton Abbey, the grand finale, which drops 48.3% in week number 3. It made $3.3 million. Its domestic totals at $38.9 million. In ninth place is They Call Him OG, which is a film from India. It's a Telugu language action movie from director Sujith, who also made Run Raja Run. It's about a former gangster who returns to face down an old rival. And in 10th place was the Fathom re-release of Spider-Man 2. This was the 2.1 version, which had previously only been available on home media. $1.1 million. I saw that Box Office Mojo counted all the Spider-Man films, because all 3 of Sam Raimi's films were in theaters this past weekend. Box Office Mojo counted them all together. I thought it was maybe best to keep them separate. And still, Spider-Man 2 does well enough to be number 10. And all 3 of the movies are going to be in theaters again this weekend. So if it's a disappointing result for some of the other films that are getting released, we could see one of these Raimi movies in the top 10 again next week. We had a 50% turnover in the top 10 because we had 5 movies that dropped out. Weapons is out after 7 weeks. The re-release of Toy Story is out after 2 weeks. And then a trio of films that just lasted 1 week in the top 10. A Big, Bold, Beautiful Journey, which was not a successful film. It was a disappointment, I think, for pretty much all involved. Again, box office-wise. Angel Studios' The Senior is out after 1 week, and Sight and Sound presents Noah Live is also out after 1 week. And looking at the biggest theater count changes for this past weekend, Toy Story lost almost all of its theaters, 1,990 theaters gone. It was still in 350. Freakier Friday lost about half of its theaters, 995 of them. It's still in 885 theaters. Hamilton lost almost all of its remaining theaters. It lost 935. It was just in 175. Downton Abbey, the grand finale, shed a pretty good number, 882 theaters. It's still in 2,829. And Weapons moved out of wide release. It lost 674 theaters. It's now in 512. This is what I like to call our road to recovery. The blue line is the box office weekend average for 2015 to 2019. The red line is the average for 2021 to 2024. And that dotted black line is every weekend this year. And you can see that we were basically just above the average where we have been for the past few years, far below where we were pre-pandemic. And we're going to take a big look at the September box office and explain why it is that we are so far below any of those pre-pandemic numbers. So let's talk for a few minutes about One Battle After Another. I mentioned earlier it is the biggest opening for a Paul Thomas Anderson film. Now, it's tough to compare his openings film to film because most of them didn't open in wide release like this one did. So I'm looking at the opening weekend of this movie versus the best weekend, the highest grossing weekend for his other films. And you can see that One Battle After Another basically quadrupled his previous highest grossing weekend, which was the fourth weekend of Magnolia. That movie brought in $5.69 million in week 4. One Battle After Another bringing in $22 million in its first week. There Will Be Blood had Paul Thomas Anderson's third best weekend ever. It brought in $4.86 million in its fifth weekend of release. Boogie Nights brought in $4.6 million in week 4. The Master brought in $4.3 million in weekend number 2. And then Punch Drunk Love, the only other movie so far for Paul Thomas Anderson to bring in over $4 million. It hit that mark in weekend number 4. Hard 8, of course, the lowest on this list. It had the smallest release. It brought in about $70,000 in its first weekend. And I found some of the coverage of the opening weekend for One Battle After Another very interesting. I don't mean to dig up old skeletons here, but it goes back to a story that I covered back in April when Sinners opened, and specifically the way that the Hollywood trade magazine Variety covered the opening weekend of Sinners. If you don't remember what that coverage looked like, this is a brief look back at it. This was from their box office write-up the weekend that Sinners came out. The write-up said, quote, "Boosted by stellar reviews and Coogler and Jordan's popularity, Sinners collected a solid $45.6 million from 3,300 North American theaters. Those ticket sales marked the biggest debut for an original film since Jordan Peele's Us opened to $71 million in 2019. But Warner Brothers spent a staggering $90 million to produce Sinners before factoring in global marketing expenses, so profitability remains a question mark. This is an excellent opening for a period horror film. It should have a good run now," says David A. Gross. However, he adds the enormous production cost is going to cast a long shadow and set a high bar to profitability. And we discussed this at length because it was a very good opening weekend for Sinners. It exceeded all expectations, and it went on to become a profitable film, a very successful film, and many people thought it was odd that Variety specifically would choose to cast its opening weekend in that sort of light. Let's fast forward several months now to this past weekend with One Battle After Another. This film had a higher budget, and it opened to about half as much as Sinners. But let's see how Variety chose to characterize this movie's opening. This is from their box office write-up this past weekend. Quote, "A low $20 million debut is disappointing for a film that cost above $130 million to produce and another $70 million to market. But the R-rated film is original and nearly 3 hours long and doesn't enjoy the built-in audience that benefits franchise fare like Superman or Jurassic World Rebirth. Building excitement and getting people to buy a ticket can take time. Quote, this movie has a chance of getting to profitability if it lasts long enough in theaters and or overperforms abroad," says David A. Gross, who runs the movie consulting firm Franchise Entertainment Research. So we have in One Battle After Another a more expensive movie than Sinners that opened to less domestically, about half as much, and yet the tone and tenor of Variety's coverage here is to sort of qualify that opening weekend. Well, it's a low opening, but it's not a franchise movie. It takes time for people to show up to the theaters. If it sticks around long enough, it could become profitable. The analysis is basically saying, yeah, it's not a good opening, but don't lose hope just yet. Whereas the Sinners opening, which was better on a lower budget was painted as, well, okay, wait, well, it was a good opening weekend, but wait just a minute, because this was a really expensive movie and profitability here is not guaranteed. It's very interesting that Variety would choose to cover these two movies where in a way where, you would think that the Sinners, the way that they cast the Sinners opening would be the way that they would look at One Battle After Another, and the way that they characterize One Battle After Another would be how they would characterize Sinners. But that's not how it worked. And there are a lot of things that you could look into here. One of them being studio narratives. We talked about that at the time. Warner Brothers, perhaps not particularly happy with the deal that Ryan Coogler was able to cut with Sinners, maybe didn't want the coverage to necessarily be that positive coming out of the gate. Whereas with Paul Thomas Anderson, it's a big investment by Warner Brothers. Maybe they would like for the trade to also put a bit of a positive spin on this. It would essentially, if this were true, mean that Variety is being used partially, intentionally or not, as a studio mouthpiece to kind of cast the movie in whatever light they want it to be cast from weekend to weekend. And of course, there is, and you can't really avoid this, the fact that Ryan Coogler is a very high-profile young black director, and Paul Thomas Anderson is a very high-profile older white director. Now, those are much more nefarious accusations to make, and I don't think that it is a cut and dry example of this, but it's something that I don't think that you can ignore, because when you look at these two articles and the way that Variety chose to cover these two movies, it to me is a very stark difference, the way that they covered Sinners and the way that they're covering One Battle After Another. And for whatever reason you want it to be, maybe trying to take a young director down a peg and boost up an older director, wanting to spin it the way that Warner Brothers would like it to be spun, or other biases that would be a much deeper conversation and a more troubling conversation. I think that that bias is there. People were saying it back when Sinners opened in April, and I think it's even more clear now. And the reason that I wanted to bring it up is that because there are a lot of people who get their information from trades like Variety, and I think it's important for those trades to be responsible in their analysis and paint pictures like they are. When Sinners came out, I was very complimentary of its opening. The fact that it had done well over the weekend, the fact that it seemed positioned well to perform domestically, and it did continue to do exceedingly well domestically. And with One Battle After Another, look, I loved both movies, and I love both directors. But you can't look at a movie like One Battle After Another with a $130 million budget, another, let's say, as they said, 70, that's a $200 million film, to open to $22 million. It's hard to put too much of a positive spin on that. And I agree that the first weekend isn't everything, but I feel like if Variety was being fair and even-handed with their coverage, they would have said this about neither film or both films. And the fact that it was a worst-case scenario, I think, for One Battle After Another, and it got the rosier coverage, I think it's something that deserves to be noted. This was, though, the biggest push ever given to a Paul Thomas Anderson film, in addition to being by far his biggest budget, over $100 million more than any budget that he's had before. And One Battle After Another is already his fourth highest grossing film at $22 million, just behind Magnolia, Boogie Nights, and then There Will Be Blood, which is his highest grossing film at $40.2 million. I think that it actually was pretty bold of Warner Brothers to give him that kind of budget, considering that very few of his films have been runaway box office successes, and many, including his last one, have not even really been box office hits. I like that Warner Brothers chose to support him in that way as an artist, and I think that it bears out on the screen. Just for fun, if you were to look at this adjusted for inflation, There Will Be Blood would still be Paul Thomas Anderson's highest grossing film at $63.6 million. Boogie Nights would be right behind at $61.5 million, followed by Magnolia at $48.7 million, Punch Drunk Love at $33.9 million, and Phantom Thread at $27.6 million. Currently on the adjusted for inflation list, One Battle After Another is at number 7, just behind The Master, and ahead of Licorice Pizza. And this takes me to our member poll here on the channel. Last week, I asked members what their favorite Paul Thomas Anderson movie was, and the number one answer is also my number one answer, There Will Be Blood, with 34 votes. Magnolia and Boogie Nights were right behind. Boogie Nights was in second place with 18 votes. Magnolia was in third place with 17 votes. This was surprising to me. In fourth place in the poll with 12 votes were the responses saying they either don't like Paul Thomas Anderson films or haven't ever seen any Paul Thomas Anderson films. I get that that's a viewpoint, but I'm a little disappointed that it was number 4 on the responses. And then tied for fifth place was Phantom Thread and Punch Drunk Love. They both got 11 votes. And that leads us to our Charts with Dan member poll question for this week. We are entering the month of October, and I want to know what you think the best horror movie / franchise is to watch leading up to Halloween. Leave your answer in the comments of the member poll, which is live now, or, and I stress this, upvote your answer if it's already there. It does help me to tally the results. The top 5 will be revealed on next week's Charts with Dan. And if you are not a member here on the channel, you can become one pretty easily depending on how you're watching this video. There may be a button for you to hit that says become a member, or you can go down the description and there is a link that will tell you how to become a member. You don't just get to vote in the member poll here every week. You also get early access to some of my videos, as well as custom badges and emoji to use down in the chat. I'd love to hear your voice. There's a lot of scary movies and Halloween-y type franchises to watch in the month of October, and I'm really anxious to learn what you, the members here on the channel, like to watch the most. Before we leave one battle after another, I also wanted to ask this week's Charts with Dan trivia question. Leonardo DiCaprio has now had 11 movies open in wide release to over $20 million. That's if you include The Revenant, which opened in limited release and then opened at over $20 million when it hit wide release. Titanic was the first movie to open over $20 million. That seemed too easy, but my question is, what was the second? What was the second movie starring Leonardo DiCaprio to open in wide release at over $20 million? I'll give you a second to think about your answer, and here it comes. It was actually 5 years after Titanic, Catch Me If You Can. It opened actually on Christmas Day, December 25th, but it still did well enough. It didn't open number 1. It opened in second place, but did well enough for the weekend of December 27th through the 29th, 2002 to make $30 million, becoming Leo's second $20+ million opening film. These were the top per theater averages this past weekend. At number 1 was One Battle After Another at just over $6,000. In second place was Wildfire, The Legend of the Cherokee Ghost Horse, which played in 8 theaters and brought in $5,293 per theater. It's a sort of inspirational story about a young girl and her horse, and obviously it's been in post-production and in the works for a while because one of the stars of the film is Anne Heche, who sadly passed away back in 2022. Gabby's Dollhouse comes in third place, bringing in $3,914 per theater in 3,500 theaters. Then we have the 4K restoration of Four Nights of a Dreamer, which is kind of traveling around, I think, doing a roadshow. It brought in $3,840 in one theater. And then Demon Slayer Infinity Castle rounds out the top 5, bringing in $2,379 per theater in 2,984 theaters. Looking at the top films in limited release, that would be 1,000 theaters or fewer. At number 1 is They Call Him OG at $1.4 million. Then we had the Emma Thompson thriller Dead of Winter in 605 theaters, which brought in just over $1 million, just missed the top 10. Eleanor the Great, starring June Squibb, directed by Scarlett Johansson, brought in almost $900,000 in 892 theaters to come in third place. In fourth place, I think if you were to count all of the actual box office for the Rocky Horror Picture Show, it would probably be on this list every single week. But there were some official 50th anniversary showings of the Rocky Horror Picture Show in 112 theaters, bringing in $135,000. That's good enough for fourth place. And then in fifth place, it's been in the slot, I think, for the last couple weeks, is The History of Sound. It was in a small number of theaters, then it expanded. Now it's contracting again. It's in 126 theaters. It brought in $82,631. Let's turn now from the domestic marketplace to the top 5 films internationally. That's all markets outside of the US and Canada. And the number 1 film was One Battle After Another, which brought in $26.1 million. In second place was Demon Slayer Infinity Castle, which has stopped rolling out to newer markets, which is why we see a much bigger drop here than we're used to, minus 61.5% from last weekend, but another $17.1 million internationally. The Conjuring Last Rites brought in another $15.4 million. I mentioned last week that this film from China, 731, had a pretty negative, it seemed like, reaction. Well, it dropped 87.4%. That's not unusual in China, but that's really something that we saw more 5 or 10 years ago. It brought in just $15.2 million. And Chainsaw Man, the movie Res Arc, as it rolls out around the world, had a 30.2% increase in business for a $13.2 million weekend. When you take those international numbers, combine it with our domestic numbers, we get the top 5 films worldwide. And at number 1 was One Battle After Another, which opened to $48.1 million. That is another personal best for Paul Thomas Anderson. Demon Slayer Infinity Castle brought in $24.2 million. That's a 60.8% worldwide drop. It is now over $600 million worldwide. The Conjuring Last Rites had a 45.4% drop worldwide, a $22.1 million weekend. It's now at $435.7 million around the world. Gabby's Dollhouse, the movie, brought in $19.2 million, and 731 is in 5th place with that 87.4% drop. With $15.2 million, that puts it over $200 million worldwide. And when we look at the 2025 worldwide box office, there are some differing numbers around Demon Slayer Infinity Castle. But what we do know is that it is at least number 8 for the year at $605.4 million. That puts it above Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, very close behind Superman, F1 the movie, How to Train Your Dragon. And should it get a Chinese release, it should easily pass all of those films to become a top 5 movie so far in 2025. Well, we are at the end of the month, which means it's time to check in and see how 2025's box office is doing cumulatively, meaning year to date versus 2024, and see what the market share is for each studio so far this year. So this is the cumulative domestic box office chart through September for each of the last 10 years, 2015 to 2025. And you can see that for 2025, we are at $6.449 billion. That is about $228 million ahead of where we were at this time last year, but we actually lost some ground versus 2024. At the end of August, we were about $261 million ahead of the 2024 box office, and a lot of you might be saying, well, wait a minute, how did we lose ground? Because September had so many big opening weekends, unexpected opening weekends in many ways. And when we look at the box office gross, September last year brought in about $592.3 million. This year, about $556.5 million. And a big reason why is the weekend 2 drops that we saw for a lot of these wide releases. This is the weekend 2 drop for every wide release, meaning 1,000 theaters or more, in September 2025. The average drop for these films, and there were 10 of them listed here, was 69.2% in weekend number 2. The Conjuring 4 dropped 69.5%. Hamilton dropped 78.1%. Demon Slayer, of course, dropped 75.5%. Spinal Tap 2, 77.6%. Him, just this past weekend, dropped 72.8%. So we had a lot of movies with impressive opening weekends that sort of, if not collapsed, certainly had a bit of a disappointing weekend number 2. And when you compare that with last year, 2024, Beetlejuice 2, which was the big September release, only dropped 53.7% in its second weekend. You did have some disappointments like The Front Room, which dropped 74%, but that wasn't a huge box office force. Speak No Evil dropped just 49.1%. Am I Racist had a pretty good domestic run. It dropped 45.7% in its second weekend. Transformers 1 was a box office disappointment, but it only dropped 62.8%, which is pretty good compared to what we saw this year. The Substance dropped 35.8% in weekend number 2, and the average drop for these films, and again, these were all of the wide releases in September 2024, was 56.7%, about 13% better. And that, I think, really is the difference. Yes, it was great to have all of those opening weekends, but so many of those movies were front-loaded, and so many more of the movies last year performed better over time that the box office really was front-loaded in September, and we ended up losing ground yet again. We'll see what the October box office looks like in about a month. When we look at the studio market share, so this is all tickets sold since January 1st through the end of September, Disney lost about 1.5% overall market share this past month. It's at 26.2% of all tickets sold, but Warner Brothers has the lead right now at 27.8% of all tickets sold. It picked up about a percentage point over the past month, and that's because it's had some pretty high-profile releases that have done well. Universal lost about half a percentage point. It's at 17.6% of all tickets sold. Paramount's still pretty much a non-factor. It lost about half a percentage point. Sony, really the big gainer as far as percentage over the past month. It gained about 1.7% market share, but that only takes the studio up to 7.4%. Of course, Demon Slayer having a lot to do with that. Lionsgate picked up about a third of a percentage point in market share. Amazon lost about 0.1%, and the All Others tab lost about 0.2%. So as we have seen throughout the year, Warner Brothers and Disney kind of jockeying back and forth. But through the end of September, Warner Brothers has the overall lead among all Hollywood studios so far this year. So that's what's going on at the box office. Let's take a look now at what's happening in the world of streaming, and we'll start with the latest numbers from Netflix. New ones will get released later today, but these are the numbers for September 15th through the 21st. At number one, it was a close race between two movies. The Netflix original film, The Wrong Paris, ended up winning at 21.82 million views, just ahead of, you guessed it, K-pop Demon Hunters, which, no big deal, just another 21.24 million views. In third place was the Liam Neeson film Ice Road Vengeance, which was not a Netflix original. It brought in 7.65 million views. Then the Netflix original movie She Said Maybe at number 4 with 7.23 million views. Wednesday Season 2 stays in the top 5 at just over 7 million views. AKA Charlie Sheen stays put right where it was at number 6 at 7.19 million views. Beauty in Black Season 2 stays put at number 7 at 6.72 million views. The Netflix original series Black Rabbit debuts at number 8 with 6.64 million views. They did a big promotional push on that series, so I would have thought it would have done better in that first week. Bon Appetit, Your Majesty is at number 9 at 6.53 million views, and the Clint Eastwood film The Mule rounds out the top 10 at 6.41 million views. These are the most watched programs on Netflix in 2025. The only real change here is that Wednesday Season 2 moves back up to number 8. It dropped after all of that runtime got added when the second part of its second season dropped, but it's now at 102.6 million total views across all episodes of the season, which puts it back above the Life list, and it's getting pretty close to Straw. I wouldn't say that this was a failure of a second season, but this is something that we see often with Season 2, which is that it does well, but it's not really able to match the phenomenal success of the first season. We see that with movie sequels and sometimes Season 2 of television shows as well. Let's take a look now at the latest numbers from Nielsen. Now, these are different from Netflix in that they're domestic only, not global, which is what we just saw, and they take about a month to get released. So this is for the week of August 25th through the 31st. These were the most watched streaming movies, and K-pop Demon Hunters was number 1. It was actually an increase from the previous week at 18.58 million hours watched. In second place was the Netflix original movie The Thursday Murder Club, almost taking that number 1 spot, 17.18 million hours watched. Thunderbolts debuted on Disney Plus the last week of August, and it brought in 11.7 million hours watched. Not huge for an MCU release hitting Disney Plus for the first time. Transformers Rise of the Beasts hit, I think, probably Netflix and has a bump up the charts at number 4 at 8.91 million hours watched. Then we had Unknown Number, the high school catfish, at number 5 at 6.26 million hours watched. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw that number grow on next week's charts. Hostiles is at number 6, followed by Happy Gilmore 2 and Hotel Transylvania 3, so a double shot of Adam Sandler there at number 7 and number 8. The Truth About Jussie Smollett, and I'm saying that because this documentary actually did have a question mark at the end, is at number 9 at 2.1 million hours watched, and The 355, which I haven't thought about since it hit theaters, I think pretty shortly after they reopened, rounds out the top 10 at 1.9 million hours watched. These were the most watched streaming shows for August 25th through the 31st. At number 1 was the return of My Life with the Walter Boys at 16.45 million hours watched. That encompasses both Season 1 and Season 2. Nielsen does not delineate between what season the viewers are watching. At number 2 was the Netflix documentary Katrina Come Hell or High Water at 15.18 million hours watched, followed by Wednesday at 14.5 million hours, Bluey, SpongeBob SquarePants, The Summer I Turned Pretty, Extant, Family Guy returning to the chart, Animal Kingdom at number 9, and Paw Patrol at number 10. And looking at the top shows as far as watch time per available episode, so you take the total hours watched, divide it by the number of episodes you could watch on any given week, we get our watch time per episode. At number 1 was Katrina Come Hell or High Water, which had one of the best watch time per episode numbers we've seen this year. Not quite top 5, but over 5 million, 5.06 million hours per episode. Then the 3-episode debut of The Terminal List, Dark Wolf, comes in second place at 2.42 million hours watched per episode. The Netflix original series Hostage comes in third at 1.41 million hours watched. Then we have Alien Earth through 4 episodes at 1.39 million hours watched per episode. Wednesday is at number 5, followed by My Life with the Walter Boys. The Hunting Wives continuing to perform well in the streaming chart, 783,000 hours per episode. Then we have The Summer I Turned Pretty at over 500,000 hours per episode, Extant at number 9, and Animal Kingdom at number 10. And that does it for the show this week. Before we go, though, I wanted to give you some suggestions for stuff that you might want to watch this upcoming week and weekend, both in theaters and at home. First of all, debuting today on Hulu is the new series Chad Powers. Glenn Powell stars as a former star quarterback attempting a comeback by going undercover to play on a small football team. If you missed The Naked Gun in theaters, it makes its debut today on Paramount+. And on HBO Max, the documentary Prime Minister debuts today. It's about former New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, and it won the Documentary Audience Award at the Sundance Film Festival. And if you're looking for a recent theatrical release, Caught Stealing is available today for digital sale and premium video on demand. And Downton Abbey, also available today to watch at home through digital sale and premium video on demand. Tomorrow on Netflix is the debut of Love is Blind Season 9. And on Paramount Plus, Josh Hartnett's Fight or Flight, which hit theaters earlier this year, makes its streaming debut. On Amazon Prime Video, there is a new original movie debuting tomorrow called Play Dirty, which is co-written and directed by Shane Black and stars Mark Wahlberg, Lakeith Stanfield, and Rosa Salazar. It is a busy weekend in theaters. First of all, Dwayne Johnson's potential awards vehicle, The Smashing Machine, finally hits theaters after debuting in a few film festivals. An unexpected box office gift here. We have Taylor Swift, the official release party of A Showgirl, which is tied into the release of her new album, is playing in theaters on Friday. It could very well be the number 1 movie/event at the box office on next week's show. Daniel Day-Lewis makes his return to acting in Anemone, which hits theaters this weekend. He co-wrote the film with his son Ronan, who directs the movie. This movie, Good Boy, was originally scheduled for a limited release, but had such positive reactions on the festival circuit that it was expanded to a wide release. It is a horror movie from the point of view of a dog, and I've heard really good things about it. It'll hit theaters this weekend. Also in many theaters around the country is Bone Lake, which is a new horror film. A couple goes to the woods, there's some creepy strangers, etc., etc. If you're not in the mood for something new, there are some re-releases in theaters this weekend. First of all, Avatar, The Way of Water, will be hitting 3D screens for a 1-week return engagement ahead of the third movie, which hits in December. And the 30th anniversary, believe it or not, and it's hard for me to believe, of Casper is being celebrated this weekend in theaters. And as I mentioned, the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films return to theaters this weekend. The first film, Spider-Man, hits theaters on Friday. Spider-Man 2 will be in theaters on Saturday, and Spider-Man 3 will be in theaters on Sunday. If you're an anime fan, you might be lucky enough to have the 4K re-release of Perfect Blue in your theater this weekend. Satoshi Kon's anime classic about a pop star who fears she's being stalked was remastered and is getting put back out in theaters. Very influential film on a lot of movies that followed. I actually saw it for the first time, I think, a year or two ago and really, really enjoyed it. Also in limited release is the Marc Maron documentary, Are We Good? So if you're a fan of Marc Maron, you might be able to check that out. In some theaters around the country, there's also a new film called Coyotes. Justin Long and Kate Bosworth fight a pack of coyotes trying to eat them during an LA wildfire. That sounds like something else. On Netflix, we have another edition of the Monster series, Monster, the Ed Gein story. Charlie Hunnam plays Ed Gein, a real-life killer who was the gruesome inspiration for movies like Psycho, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and The Silence of the Lambs. I don't think this will be a very pleasant series to watch, but these Monster limited series are very big performers for Netflix. On Apple TV Plus is the film The Lost Bus, which had a limited theatrical run. Matthew McConaughey plays a school bus driver trying to evacuate a group of kids from a wildfire. Hopefully they don't run across that wild pack of coyotes trying to eat Justin Long. On Netflix, the Cillian Murphy film Steve makes its streaming debut after a limited theatrical run for a couple of weeks. And then some more recent theatrical releases that'll be hitting streaming this weekend on HBO Max. One of my favorite movies of the year, but also just get ready for this one, Bring Her Back. I thought it was pretty disturbing, but I also enjoyed it. That'll be on HBO Max on Friday. And then Honey Don't, which had a pretty short run theatrically, will already be hitting Peacock also on Friday. And that's everything I've got for you this week. As I mentioned, I'll be working on getting the studio back together. I'm going to be keeping my ear to the ground for news stories. I'm going to try to keep making more videos, bring the live show back this week, hopefully as well. Really get back into the groove as I settle in to this new area. Thank you for your patience with what I'm sure are probably some technical issues and some set dressing issues and stuff as I get set up in this new space. But most of all, thank you for watching this episode of the show. If you're not subscribed to the channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button, hit the thumbs up, share this video with your friends, hit the bell so you know when I do new videos, all that stuff that everyone tells you to do. I'd love it if you did it for me too. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you then. Bye.